I'd like to start by just replying to some of the things Tucker said. And generally, our challenge here tonight is that Tucker and Jordan and I agree on almost everything. So we're trying to get a bit of controversy going. But I would say this, Tucker, as far as I can see, the governing party in your country now has as its sole claim to resumption of its mandate the equation Trump equals Hitler, which is, of course, so fatuous and outrageous that no person with an IQ in at least double figures could believe it. And it will get the reception it deserves on Election Day, I think, despite massive efforts at stuffing the ballot boxes and bringing non-existent people onto the voting list. But because of that, I think we should be doubly careful about suggesting that Chrystia Freeland, whom I also know, I've known her for some years, is worse than the Nazis. I mean, she isn't. She's actually quite a nice lady, but she's politically misguided, has always been misguided. The FT which you support, other than for hiring her, is itself not an acceptable publication anymore. It's a ludicrous, globalist, socialistic, interventionist, regimentationist paper, not really the paper it was under Nigel Lawson and others of a legitimate newspaper for commerce, free commerce everywhere in the world. And so what we have is bad enough without suggesting it's Nazism or worse. It isn't. It's not that bad, but it's bad.
If I could just, this is a problem that I have had my whole life. I don't fully explain what I think, and you raise a really good point. I made a serious charge against her, and let me just be a lot more precise about why I believe what I said. I saw the video the other day, and I've never taken her seriously, as I said. But I didn't think that she was as malicious and cold as I now believe she is until I saw the video of David Menzies from Rebel News being arrested after trying to ask her a question. And I thought to myself, as someone who is often approached by people as I walk into buildings with questions, how would I feel if someone approached me and asked a question, even a question I don't like, and my security team threw him against a wall and put him in handcuffs? I would say, you stop that immediately. I could not, as a matter of conscience, allow a man to be arrested in my presence for asking a question. And I think that anyone who thinks that's okay is a truly dangerous person who should not have power. That's how I feel.
I agree with you, except I don't think she ordered it. I think we
But she watched it.
No, let me say something. I think in a way what happened is even more worrisome than that. Some palooka from the RCMP took it upon himself as a demonstration of initiative, precisely the kind of initiative you attributed to the people in goose-stepping in tight uniforms. I mean, many people, especially in the United States, still think of the RCMP as people in red tunics with a musical ride and, Rosemarie with Nelson Eddy and so on, singing in the Rockies here. But we saw in the MacDonald Commission inquiry after the imposition of the War Measures Act by the elder Trudeau in 1970, what an absolutely incompetent bunch of palookas the RCMP are. So some of the blame belongs on them, their initiative. I agree,
but it's her security detail. And as someone, I know you spent a lot of your life with security around you, whatever, you just can't allow that. You just cannot allow people to behave that way because it's such a violation of human rights. And that's happening in this country, and no one's saying anything about it. That's what I think.
I want to turn to Jordan. We've had discussions in Calgary earlier today and last night, and I emerged as the optimist. And I'm not an absolute optimist, but in fact, I think the public is turning in this country and in the United States. I'm afraid as a member of the British Parliament, I can't hold out any hope for England for the next 5 years, but it'll come to its senses eventually. But I think it's turning, and we see it tonight. We see it, believe it or not, it is even the case in Toronto, where you Albertans have more friends and admirers than you think, including Jordan and me. A city, I may say, that I understand Albertans don't like Toronto, and I don't blame them, but when Tucker compares Toronto to Gary, Indiana, which is a bombed-out rubble heap of abandoned steel factories and rioters and drug dealers, He stirs up something I was not aware that I possessed, and that was a bit of municipal chauvinism. But I would like to ask Jordan, on this business of, I mean, we agree. I think everyone in this great stadium agrees with Tucker's denunciation of our health system. It's a shambles and a disgrace. And it is so bad that, as he said, the health system that's supposed to promote life is now selling the virtues of suicide, and not only to sick people, to poor people as well, as if you have no chance of recovering and becoming prosperous. But Jordan, where do you stand on this optimism, pessimism scale that Tucker and I have built up a little here?
I think we have every reason to assume that, and I guess this is why I'm going around the world talking to people, I guess, is that I think that if we put our hearts and our souls into it, that we could make this world into a place that's so good we could hardly imagine it. And I think with the technology that's in front of us, which is transforming at a rate that's beyond comprehensible, literally, that we could do much better in the next 50 years than we did in the last 200, and that's really saying something. But I also think that if we let the worst parts of ourselves gain the upper hand, given our enhanced technological power, we could produce a hell that would make Stalinist Russia and Nazi Germany look like practice. And so there's a great hope in that, but a great warning. And one of the things you all want to consider too is that because you're so much more powerful than people were in the past with the technology that you have at your disposal, with the influence that you can have in the world, that all your particular and individual moral flaws are going to find their amplification in the world in a way that wasn't really evidently true in the past. And so I think that if we got our act together, things could be unbelievably positive. But if we remain narcissistic, infantile, and foolish, like certain of our leaders, then things could go extraordinarily badly. And I think we'll see how that plays out in the course of the lifetimes of most of the people in this room.
I have the honor of sharing a podcast with the eminent historian Victor Hanson and the former U.S. drug czar and education secretary Bill Bennett. And Victor presents, I think, very accurately the correlation of forces in our English-speaking countries' societies that Tucker referred to. The enemy of practically all of us here, unless they're spies from the CBC or elsewhere, they possess the academy, they possess the media, they possess Wall Street and the equivalent to an extent in Canada. Silicon Valley, which I agree with you is an abominable place. You should direct your strictures against them instead of Toronto. And they have big entertainment and big sport. I mean, people are tremendously talented at entertaining and athletics, but are utter morons politically, malignant morons, many of them. They have all of that, but we have the people. And we are going to show that. And despite their attempt to steal elections in your country, we don't much stoop to that here. Although we may learn, we imitate everything else you do. Despite that, we're going to win. And I feel I'm very confident about that. And on what Jordan said, even the period since World War II, when the great powers haven't been at war with each other, has shown an astounding increase in prosperity in the world. The total percentage in the whole world, huge populations it now has, that's in designated poverty, severe poverty, is down to under 10%. I mean, we are making progress. It's just frustrating that these leading countries, such as ours, are at the moment so incompetently governed. And we are ultimately going to lose our position of moral and practical leadership if we underperform, as this country now is underperforming. So, but you know, I wish I could say I could suggest any better way of getting out of this and reversing the trend than the one I have. I think if we all keep our heads about us and go to the polls and change governments, I think we'll get what we want. The people do get the government we deserve, and if we deserve a good government, we'll get a good government. And you have one here in Alberta.
May I just clarify one thing? I'm sorry to beat up on Toronto, and I'm certainly sorry to compare it to Gary, Indiana. Toronto is not the worst place in the world, and I'll concede that Gary ended up maybe a little worse. My problem with Toronto is not with the city itself, which is, again, fine, as cities go. It's the metaphor of Toronto and the vision of the future that Toronto represents. And so the question that no one ever asks about most places is, what do they do here? Like, what's the point of the city? What's the business here? What do they add to the country? And Toronto represents a vision that I reject, which is an economy based on banking and real estate. I don't think it's a real economy. I think banking has its place, real estate has its place. I don't think you can build a country on that, and I don't think you should. This province represents the alternative vision, which I support, which is a place that actually adds to the sum total of good in a country, that produces energy and food. And energy and food are non-negotiables. You have to have them. You do not have to have banking, and you do not have to have commercial real estate. Okay, you just don't. There are places without them. In fact, most of history has been sort of fine without them. But no place can exist without energy or food. And so when I see the relative status allocated to Alberta versus Toronto, that part of Ontario, I'm like, this is out of whack. There is no sane world in which a city that produces nothing is more impressive than a province that produces everything that the country needs. So that's all I'm saying.
Jordan, you're a renowned psychologist, and your renown has been most recently emphasized by the attempt of your peers to discipline you and send you for lessons in public relations. The fact that they would do this, it does indicate how extraordinarily accomplished you are and how widely admired you are. And notwithstanding my city of residence, I'm very proud that you replaced our former mayor, Rob Ford, as the world's most famous Canadian. But I want to ask you, as a psychologist, do you think that the psychology of the United States and Canada right now, mass psychology, is such that we are in upward mode? We're going to cast off the incompetence that has ruled us and the perfidy and venality that has ruled us, and do a better job of self-government? I mean, is the psychology right for an upward movement, or do you feel we're sinking?
No, I think, again, I would say I'm optimistic on that front too, because I think the best thinkers that I've encountered, and I'm privileged because, well, apart from the fact that I'm male and white, obviously, but sorry about that. But I've been privileged to meet some of the world's brightest people and to talk to them in depth, you know, and I see a realization dawning, even in unlikely places, that the core values of our civilization, and those are really Judeo-Christian values, are valid true and irreplaceable. And let me explain what I've seen. So in recent months, I've watched a number of surprising conversions or semi-conversions. And so Ayaan Hirsi Ali, some of you may know of Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and if you don't, you should, because she's one of the world's bravest people. And she was a real admirer of the new atheists for a long time. And she had her reasons, because she suffered greatly at the hand of psychopathic fundamentalists. And she's concluded that the Christianity that underlies her society is irreplaceable and has actually converted. That, despite being an admirer for a very long time of the new atheists, Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris, were very intelligent people, by the way, but wrong in a deeply interesting way. Her husband, Neil Ferguson, who was also an atheist, has also converted. My friend Douglas Murray, who was also a follower of the new atheists, now realizes and understands, and I would say intellectually, that a humanism unmoored from a deep metaphysical substrate will fall prey to the kind of ideological lunacy that now characterizes our times and that threatened the entire planet a number of times in the 20th century. I can see this happening all over, and there are deep reasons for that, and they're going to become more evident in very short order. And so I think we're on the verge of a conscious metaphysical revolution that will reveal to us once again the profundity, depth, necessity, and value of the core propositions that made the West free, prosperous, and great. And so...
May I just add one thing to that? I couldn't agree with that more. I can't express it as eloquently as you just did, and I want to try. But I'll say two things. One, I noticed that, and I've never been an atheist, but I've never been, that far from atheism. I always lived in sort of rich, well-educated world among people who mock the religious because they're primitive. And in the last 2 or 3 years, I have heard more people talk about the possibility that all that we can experience with our senses is not all that there is. And of course, that's true. It's obviously true. And there's no society in human history that's believed otherwise. Only the West, since we dropped the atom bomb on Hiroshima, only the West, since 1945, has proceeded as a society with the assumption that there's no God. That's never happened before. And of course, it doesn't work at all. That's changing really fast, and I feel it. I also see, and it's very obvious if you just look for it, that the main thing that people who run this country and my country and a lot of Western countries hate is Christianity. They hate it more than anything. And you see it in their behavior. You see it in the arrests of Christian pastors. And if there's one group in the world, whether you're a Christian or not, you certainly don't need to be a Christian to acknowledge what's obviously true. These are the least threatening, least bad people in your society. These are the people who mean you the least harm. These are the people who commanded to pray for their enemies. These are people who commanded to give up their life for people they don't know and for others. And so again, you don't have to be an adherent of that religion to see those people as a group you might want more of. Because what's the downside to having people who love you despite the fact you hate them? Like, that seems like you'd want more of those. And yet those people are the first to get arrested. And their churches are burned, 90 in this country, with the full tacit support of your government. Like, what is that? Why are they going after them? Of all the problems your country has, my country has, why are the Christians being persecuted? And they are being persecuted. Well, it tells you there's something else going on here. Maybe their goals, maybe this is part of something bigger. I mean, just meditate on that for the weekend and see the conclusion you come to. That's all I would say.
On this, Tucker, I have to agree with you completely, and I'm afraid that Canada is in the forefront of advanced Western countries with a Judeo-Christian tradition and a tradition of tolerance also. at the forefront, the vanguard of effectively shedding our even what is now a officious and paper-thin adherence to the idea of a divine intelligence existing. We're getting perilously close all the time, and you see it in judgments of the Supreme Court that are terribly poorly reasoned and agitate against any religious notions that should cause them to temper their idea of interpretation of the law. And I would just say that we, all of us, know enough that if you, I'm not talking about what people's religious practice is or anything like that, that's none of my business. But if you banish absolutely the idea in a militant atheistic manner that it is impossible that there are any spiritual forces or anything whatsoever beyond what we absolutely know, you are creating a vacuum in the human mind and in society that ultimately will be filled by horrible pagan monsters like Hitler and Stalin.
Can I say one thing? This is, one of the saddest facts of our current civilization is that, there's just no history. The iPhone makes history irrelevant. It's all about right now. But it's worth learning some things about history. And here's my recommendation. Spend, an afternoon reading about the French Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, the Spanish Civil War. And what do they all have in common? At their heart was a desire not to replace Christianity with reason, as the Jacobins claimed, but to crush and destroy and to humiliate Christians in a way that's very reminiscent of what the Romans did in the 1st and 2nd centuries. It's not just oh, that's silly and superstitious, we're gonna move on to something better. It's no, we're going to crush you and we're going to ritually humiliate you. And that is very much what the trans thing is about. No one is helped by transgenderism. You've never met anyone who is happier because he's self-castrated. I personally feel very sorry for trans people. I'm not angry at them at all. I think they are victims of bigger forces. But to officially promote that is a humiliation ritual designed to put Christians in an untenable position where they have to either swear allegiance to the new state religion, which is transgenderism, or to their ancestral religion, which is Christianity. It is a loyalty test, and it's meant to humiliate and destroy them. And let's just be honest about what we're seeing.
So I've been thinking about this idea of what should be properly put in the highest place for a very long time. I became convinced 40 years ago, I suppose, of the existence of evil in some transcendent sense. I suppose when I tried to look for something that I had, what would you say, that I could claim with unshakable faith, what I discovered was that there were certain acts that occurred in the 20th century that were so brutal and so malevolent that they absolutely convinced me of the reality of evil. And there's a corollary to that that's necessary to understand, is that if evil, an absolute evil exists, first of all, if absolute evil doesn't exist, then what happened in Auschwitz was just a matter of opinion, right? The moral catastrophe of Auschwitz is just an opinion. And that in itself is a conclusion that has no small degree of malevolence. So we should be clear about that. If what happened in Auschwitz, if the fact that Auschwitz camp guards could conduct themselves in the utterly brutal manner that they did and enjoy it, if that was evil, and that's a fact, then, hey, pipe down. This isn't your conference. Then there's an opposite, right? If you identify something on one pole, you've implicitly identified something on the other pole. And so one of the things you might say is that whatever absolute good might be, and that would be something akin to God, would be that which is as far away from Auschwitz as you can possibly get. And to pursue that would be to pursue the direction that leads you as far away, let's say, from the horrors of Nazi Germany as you could get. And I believe that technically there is no difference between that and the pursuit of a religious path. And then I would say, if it's true that the core of malevolence is something like the sacrifice of others in a painful manner to your own idiot whims and desire for power, which isn't a bad encapsulation, then the opposite of that would be your voluntary self-sacrifice in the service of what's best and others. And that is the ideal that Christianity puts at the center of the moral universe. And so I don't see a way around that. And that's not a conclusion that I drew lightly, for what that's worth. I spent 40 years thinking about very little else than that. And I think that we're going to come to understand that consciously, widely, far more rapidly than anyone suspects, for any number of reasons. And that will be, well, the consequences of that are very difficult to predict, but the fact that it's going to occur is definitely one of the things that makes me optimistic. We've all been faced in the 20th century, I would say, with the irrefutable evidence of transcendent evil. And that means we all now have the opportunity to discover the irrefutable existence of transcendent good, and to allow that to guide us. And if with our technological power, we had the capacity to be guided by what is truly and transcendently good, then there's nothing we couldn't accomplish in the positive direction.
Tucker, whether everybody in this country is happy with it or not, the whole world is extremely heavily influenced by the United States. And whatever any of us think of any American regime, none of us in the West should ever fail to remember and be grateful for the fact that we owe chiefly to the United States the greatest strategic, bloodless victory in the history of the world, our victory of Western civilization in the Cold War and the tremendous spread of democracy and the free market in the world. We owe it chiefly to your country, and we must never forget that. So with that in mind, I'd like you to be as daring as you can and as perceptive as only you can be as someone who knows the United States, all of the United States very well. What do you predict is going to happen in this political year in that country?
Thank you. I couldn't be more grateful to be an American. I've always felt that way. As I said, my dad's family was from Nova Scotia. They left at the time of the American Revolution because they didn't want to be free, so they fled to the Maritimes. And just kidding. But anyway, then they came back, ultimately. Many are still there. Their name is Rayfuse. I think they're liberal. But I have always been grateful for my birthright as an American and for the God-given rights that are protected by my government officially in the Bill of Rights, which is a beautiful document, the greatest document we've ever produced, and that no other country has. So, and I will feel that way till I die. And unlike a lot of people in our leadership class, I have no plans to go anywhere else. I've got too many children and too many dogs, and I'm dying there. But I'm definitely very concerned, and I can't see the outcome of this year clearly at all. I was thinking yesterday, it really is like looking through a shower curtain. You see these opaque shapes lurking, but you can't tell if they're, friend or foe, nude or clothed. You don't really know what you're looking at. But you know that there is a collision coming between titanic forces, the population of America versus its leaders. And it's coming to a head because of the structure of this election. And so you have the Republican candidate, and he is going to be the candidate, whose election is the one thing. I think it's kind of determined, and And of course, it's politics, so it's filled with all sorts of, I mean, the amount of ugliness display beneath the surface in all politics everywhere is really awe-inspiring. You know, these people are really dirty everywhere, not just my country. You may know about that. But the one thing that the people in power, and I don't just mean in Washington in our government, I mean in our financial centers and entertainment centers. Our country's kind of cool because they're identified by cities. So Los Angeles, New York, Washington make all the decisions, of course. And the one thing they won't tolerate is the orange man in power. And you sort of, and that, like, you wonder, well, why? Because Trump is not a radical at all. And Trump's vision for America, this is an informed assessment of Trump, Trump's vision for America is like Studio 54 in 1978. Like, I'm serious. Trump really loved the country he grew up in. He really loved it, and he means it. He loved the people who lived there. He loved its traditions, its weird little customs, its idiosyncrasies, and that's kind of what he wants. He doesn't want a brave new future of new things. He wants to return not to antebellum America, but to like 1980 America. And it's kind of hard to argue why that's bad, actually. And so that's not a revolutionary agenda, nor is it a counter-revolutionary agenda. It's a return to normalcy. And the phrase, make America great again, means return it to a period not so long ago when everyone was enfranchised and everyone had rights, but everyone was roughly, not everyone, but most people were sort of united in a sense of common purpose and culture. They were Americans, and they knew what that meant. We don't have that anymore, and that's Trump's vision. So you may not think that's possible. You may not think maybe that's even virtuous to want that. But if you think that's a grotesque hellscape that he's describing, you're the freak, not him. And yet they all feel that way. They mean it too. They really feel that way. It's not a joke. And so what's gonna happen? And I guess I dissent a little bit from the much more optimistic view that you have, both of you, which I really appreciate hearing and I want to believe it, but that in the end, the will of the people matters. The conclusion that I've come to is that it matters less than it should. And that the people in power really do make the bulk of the decisions. And I say that after spending 35 years in Washington and watching the agenda of both parties and comparing that agenda to the public opinion polling of what people actually want and finding no union set. No union set. Like there's not the same agendas. And we have a democratic system where these people are elected every 2 years in the Congress, every 6 years in the Senate, every 4 years in the White House. And their agenda never changes. And the desires of the American public, by and large, are never met or even addressed. And you sort of, after a while, conclude, maybe it doesn't matter what people want. It only matters what the people in power want. I don't want to think that, but I don't know what other conclusion to reach. So what you have now is a legit mass movement on behalf of Donald Trump that's 100% real, and you have absolute ironclad resistance to the democratic process working its way to a legitimate conclusion by the people who have all the power. What happens next? I don't even know. And I'll sum it up this way. Today, it is a race in the foreseeable future between Donald Trump, the former president, now effectively the Republican nominee, and the incumbent president. They got more votes than Barack Obama somehow, because he's just so popular. It's just the magnetism. He spent the entire 2020 campaign moldering and deteriorating in his basement, and somehow he was more popular than Barack Obama. Right, okay. Anyway, so it's the race between Biden and Obama. I just don't see that happening. I just don't. And that, I hope to be wrong. I want to return to normalcy too. I'm the opposite of a revolutionary too. That's what I love about Trump. He doesn't want radical change. We're not actually made for radical change. We can't digest it. People hate radical change. They want kind of continuity, and I do too. But I just don't see this playing out the way it's currently formulated. Sorry.
See, so I would say maybe that, and you, Tucker, you actually asked for an alternative to the view that you were expressing, the somewhat pessimistic view of the dominance of people in power. In the video that led up to your entrance onto the stage, you pointed out a realization that you had, which was that nothing better in your life can happen to you than what happens if you tell the truth. And I believe that to be the case. I actually believe that that's why we have the idea that power is vested in the people. And I don't think that power is where people think it is. I don't think that power is in the hands of the elite. The ability to manipulate, misuse power might be in the hand of the elite, but the power that we need to set the world straight is actually at your fingertips. And this is actually a rather terrifying realization, because there's some relief in thinking that the elites can do whatever they want, and there's nothing that someone as small as you could possibly do about it. And that's wrong, because you're not small. And it's wrong because it's irresponsible to presume that. And it's wrong because the truth is more terrifying and also more liberating. And the truth of the matter is that if you utilized what you had at hand, which at least is the ability that you have at hand to say what you think truly and as clearly as you can, even if you're not that articulate, that the world would change around you in ways that would make you immune to the blandishments of the power-mongering elite. And I'm hoping that enough people will realize the power of their affinity with the truth, especially when it's allied with the will to aim up, to have the courage to speak that truth. And if enough people do that, then the terrible things that we're concerned about coming forward at us in the future will have no purchase whatsoever. Like I learned a long time ago that the war that we're in is psychological or spiritual, if you want to look at it that way, rather than political. And everyone has a sense of that now, that it's something is moving that's deeper than the mere political. The tectonic plates themselves are shifting, and you're all going to play a role in that, and the role you'll play is going to be determined by what you determine to ally your speech with, for example, your decision about whether or not you're going to tell the truth in the confines of your own life. And if enough people, all of you, if enough of you decide in the local circumstances of your own life to dare to say what you believe to be true, then the tyrants will have no purchase on you and you won't be slaves. And just by definition.
Hey, can I just, I just want to say what a beautiful sentiment I think that is. And I wish I had said that. And I'm so thankful that you said that. And the message that I often get, who knows from where, is that when I really feel like things are falling apart, that the only thing I can do is to really try my best to be a better person. And that really matters. And specifically, I mean, to tell the truth all the time, not just in public, but in private, to really love the people around me and be attentive to them more than anything. And that in doing that, you lose your fear of the future. And you know that no matter what happens, you're gonna be okay. You're not afraid of death. And anyway, thank you for saying that.
Since Tucker didn't exactly answer my question, I'm going to give an answer and ask you to comment on it.
I love it.
Many of the people in this stadium would be aware that I'm probably, though not an uncritical one, the most vocal and consistent supporter of President Trump in Canada. And that is based on the fact that it has been my privilege to know him for 25 years, and he's always been a good and loyal friend, including in the worst of times that I endured when many of his financial peers in the United States and in this country had a merciless attack of amnesia and forgot my phone number, and he did not. But I also evaluate him as a statesman. And I put it to you, Tucker, that there is a clear, really a clearly discernible tendency in the run-up to your election. The forces that abominate Trump and even highly intelligent friends of mine and yours, who, when the word Trump is uttered, other than a bridge card playing context, a trap door opens in their forehead and a cuckoo bird flies out and they start screeching nonsense. These people so obsessed with the hatred of their president are gradually losing ground. I mean, in the last election, to defeat Trump, they had to mail out unsolicited 81 million ballots. Millions of them were collected. None of them could be verified. They were dropped in drop boxes out in the rural America in the middle of the night, not on election day. And on this basis, the judiciary abdicated its role as a co-equal branch of your government and wouldn't hear any of the substantive cases, or 19 of them. They wouldn't hear any of them. And they wouldn't judge on the constitutionality of the changes in voting and vote counting rules, supposedly to assist voting during the pandemic, but really to screw Trump. And they were aggravated by the media locking arms and saying every word that Trump and his supporters have uttered criticizing that election were lies, not things they disagreed with, lies, conscious, intentional lies, deliberate, premeditated lies. And this has so annoyed such a large group of Americans that they become progressively angrier the more unreasonable the attempt to destroy democracy by the incumbents has become. They see the effective leader of the opposition, a former president, buried under an avalanche of absolutely nonsensical, spurious indictments, politically motivated. They've seen the corruption of the intelligence agencies with the Trump-Russian nonsense. They've seen the FBI director Comey saying 245 times under oath, I don't recall, about events a couple of years before, having to do with his role in taking a pastiche of defamations, calling it intelligence and putting it out into the media that's all been paid for by the Clinton campaign. The country sees it, and it is getting angrier and angrier. And I think there's a sort of rumbling noise in America. And what is going to happen is ultimately, although it won't be quite put this way, it'll be a referendum between those who so hate Trump, they're prepared to justify any desecration and debasement and violation of the constitutional democracy of America to keep him out of the White House, and those who are so horrified at this desecration of the Constitution that they're absolutely determined to put him back in the White House. And I think he will win, and I think the fact that he will win, when cant and emotionalism subside and serious history is written, I think it will be seen as one of the great positive watermarks in the strengthening and reinforcement of American democracy.
Wow. Go, Conrad Black. You can... When Conrad Black ran the media in this country, it was a better time. That was a wonderful summation of the 2020 election in which Democrats cheated at scale, fact. And I hope it plays out in the way that you describe. And in my personal view of it, my views align pretty substantially with Donald Trump's. Even if they didn't, I would vote for Donald Trump, because you can't end 250 years of representative democracy because you don't like a candidate, period. You can't indict people for political reasons, which they have done. And you can't take people off the ballot in the name of democracy when they haven't been convicted of a crime. I mean, it's like so nuts. So if you care about the systems that your ancestors created, and which was the envy of the world, I mean, half the world, more than half the world, modeled their democracies after our democracy. So if your democracy is erased because people don't like Trump, it's kind of a profound change, not just in your country, but in the world. And that's not a good change, and you just don't want that. So I absolutely hope that it plays out that way. I guess part of what I was saying is I don't believe, with Trump up 8 points or whatever he is now over Biden, in the face of 4 indictments, facing life in prison for non-crimes. The more you know about it, the more it defies belief, and I think Conrad Black explained it fairly well. He's still leading Joe Biden. So if the point of the Democratic Party is to hold power, there's nothing ideological with the Democratic Party. The idea is we should have the power and you shouldn't. That's it. they're about to lose power to Trump because Biden is so demonstrably incompetent. And they're gonna make a change of some kind. That's not acceptable. So I don't know what that change is gonna be, but I spent my life living with them, so I know what they're like. And there will be a change. They will not lose to Trump if they can help it. And I mean it. And if that means replacing Biden or doing something unspeakable, they will do it. Like that, they're very serious about this. They're much more, the other side is much more serious about power than normal people are. Normal people understand that power is, and I alluded to this, is like a double-edged thing. It's nice to have it, but it can also destroy you. They don't necessarily want power. I definitely don't want power. But a certain kind of hollow person needs it above all. So I just think, beware. They're capable of anything.
Thanks, Tucker. Unfortunately, we're going to have to wind this up. So I'm going to just say one brief final comment on the American thing and then ask Jordan to close for the three of us. I just very briefly make 2 points. I think that the Trump haters hate isn't there anymore. He doesn't have to walk his tweets back. His conduct is not embarrassing or gauche. And the Trump they hated, they portrayed with, he gave them plenty of ammunition to do it, as a boorish, boastful caricature of the ugly American. He isn't there anymore. And what has replaced him is a man who, of course, is confident. And an ex-president and a billionaire tends to be confident, but he is an underdog being persecuted and fighting it courageously, and everybody respects that. And I don't think people realize how the public reaction to him has evolved according to that. And the final point I'd make is, so often all of us here who are generally conservative lament that our party in whichever country is often sort of on a suicide mission. But this time, inexplicably to me, the Democrats are. They appear to be circling the drain, ostensibly led by a senescent, sticky-fingered old boob who couldn't run a two-car funeral. On that, it pains me to be disrespectful of the occupant of so great an office, but I'm afraid that's an accurate description. On that, I yield the chair to my distinguished friend.
Well, we talked tonight, about the political a lot. And I would say to some degree we centered on that. We talked a fair bit as well about the psychological and the spiritual. And I guess one of the things we might do is reflect on the proper ordering of those. If there's a moral world, let's say, that has a hierarchical ordering, one of the things that was realized long ago is that there's a dominion of God and there's a dominion of Caesars, and that you render unto God what is God's and unto Caesar what is Caesar's. And we rendered a fair bit unto Caesar tonight, and maybe I'd close with some concluding words about what it would mean to render unto God and what it would mean for you all as individuals, and that would allow us to reflect a little bit more on this idea of upward aim and truth. I think it's laudable that you're all here, even if it's primarily for political reasons, because I think that people in a democracy, in a representative democracy, in a free society, people who aren't slaves have to take their political responsibility with all due seriousness, right? Otherwise, you're not self-governing. You abdicate that responsibility to other people, and you'll abdicate it. If you abdicate it, you'll abdicate it to the psychopaths who enjoy power, and you're not going to like that, the consequence of that. And so you have to shoulder your political responsibility, but then you also have to see it in the proper perspective. And I think Tucker was making an allusion to that, is that you have your important destiny right in front of you. You have to take responsibility for your own lives, treat yourself as if you have a certain implicit, intrinsic value, that you're made in the image of God, you might say. You have to treat the people around you, your wife, your husband, as if they have the same value as you, and you have to do everything to foster their development and your relationship. And you have to do that with your family, and then your family has to do that with its community, your town, and your local businesses, your friends. And then all of those local enterprises have to do that at the level of city and province. And then if there's anything left over, the higher order political system can deal with that. But you want to walk out of here tonight thinking about how you want to aim the world in the proper place. Part of that is your political deliberations, but much more of that is the ethic that you bring forward in your life and in your words. And I truly believe, as I said, that you have a very important role to play in how the world's going to lay itself out. Are we going to be optimistic or pessimistic? I would say to a very large degree, and more than you think. It depends on the decision that you make with every act you take about whether or not you're aiming towards something better or towards something worse. And to the degree that you're aiming at something worse, you'll get exactly what you're asking for. And to the degree that you're aiming at something better, you could play a signal force in bringing that about. And the better you got at that, as your aim improved and the truth of your words mounted in power, the more effective a force you would be in promoting what's good. And you have that opportunity, as we all do. And so I would say in closing, we can watch this strange political year unfold, and we can hope for the best, but we can also strive with all of our might to make sure that we're part of the force that's actually aiming at the best.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. The defining principle of the American legal system, really of American life, the principle that has kept us free, is equal justice. And the principle is fairly simple. No matter what you look like or who your parents were or what your politics might be, the law treats you exactly the same way as it would any other American. In this country, justice is blind. Now, that's a lofty standard, but because Americans have long believed in fairness, and because most of the people in charge of administering that system have behaved in good faith, this country has, for the most part, lived up to its core ideal for 250 years, making it the greatest country in the world. But the populist surge of 2016 changed everything. Permanent Washington suddenly felt more threatened by its own voters, by American voters, than by any foreign adversary. Donald Trump, to them, seemed more dangerous than ISIS. They panicked. And in their panic, our leaders decided to turn the American legal system, as well as the American intel agencies, and if necessary, the U.S. Army, against their political opponents. They felt they had no choice. In doing this, they abandoned the ancient principle of equality under the law, and they replaced it with what is effectively a loyalty oath. Opponents of the regime became enemies of the state. That's a huge change, and you're seeing the results of that change tonight. Just 24 hours after a Manhattan grand jury indicted Joe Biden's rival in the next presidential race, another jury, also in New York, convicted a Republican social media influencer called Douglas Mackey. What did Mackey do wrong? Well, Douglas Mackey's crime was mocking Hillary Clinton voters online. You're seeing on your screen the meme that Mackey posted on Twitter during the 2016 election. In that meme, Mackey suggests it's possible to vote for president by text message, because only Hillary voters could be stupid enough to believe something so absurd. But of course, in real life, no one did believe that. Mackey's insult did not alter a single vote in the election, and no one has proved otherwise. The government brought forth not a single victim of this crime. It couldn't. Douglas Mackey was joking. Nobody believed he was a federal election official. And in fact, his social media profile pictured a Donald Trump hat. It was unmistakable. This was mockery. But in the wake of the 2016 election and the rising hysteria about Donald Trump, mocking the Democratic Party became a crime. So as a result, tonight, Douglas Mackey faces 10 years in prison. The case against Doug Mackey is the most shocking attack on freedom of speech in this country in our lifetimes. It's also a useful lesson in who will be allowed to speak going forward. As it turns out, a woman called Christina Wong posted an almost identical meme the same year, back during the 2016 election. But unlike Doug Mackey, Wong voted for Hillary Clinton. "Hey, Trump supporters," she wrote, "skip poll lines and text in your vote." Same crime. But the Department of Justice under Joe Biden has shown no interest in prosecuting Christina Wong. Do you see how this works? Have you internalized our new partisan legal standards? That would be the point of the exercise. They want you to know the rules. We'll have more on the Doug Mackey case and what it means for you and for America in just a moment. And by the way, Douglas Mackey is not the only Trump supporter who is now going to prison because of how he voted. According to new reporting from Julie Kelly, the FBI's Counterterrorism Division just arrested a grandmother in the state of Virginia on 4 misdemeanors this week. What exactly did she do? She entered the Capitol with her elderly mother for a total of 15 minutes on January 6th. She hurt no one. She destroyed nothing. She just stood there. And yet, at the very same time, during the very same week, none of the transgenderist thugs who invaded the Tennessee State House yesterday have been rounded up by the FBI Counterterror Division, and of course they won't be. Joe Biden just honored them with a Trans Day of Visibility. So what we're watching here, unmistakably, is bigger than Donald Trump, but we're going to begin tonight with the latest on his case, and we're doing that because he is, and this is not at all incidental to his prosecution, he is the leading Republican candidate for president. Now, Trump apparently is being charged not with treason or insurrection or collusion or even shoplifting, but with something much smaller, a slew of process crimes relating to a payment he apparently made 7 years ago. In no fair system would that be a crime under the law 7 years later. But the Soros-funded district attorney in Manhattan, Alvin Bragg, has stitched together a Frankenstein legal theory to justify this prosecution. Under normal circumstances, it would be impossible because the statute of limitations has passed. And as if all of that were not third world enough, someone leaked the news of Donald Trump's grand jury indictment to the media. Now, that in itself is a crime under the law in New York. In fact, a much bigger crime than those under which Donald Trump is being charged. Will Alvin Bragg prosecute the leaker? Please. It's almost certainly someone in his own office. Nor will Bragg prosecute, as many people have pointed out today, the crimes of Hunter Biden or other Democratic partisans. Those aren't rare or hard to find. Bragg will not prosecute Hillary Clinton, even though she just admitted to violating campaign finance law by paying for the fake Russian dossier. What's fascinating is that none of this has alerted the watchdogs to government abuse, our media. No, just the opposite. The media are cheerleading our new standards of tribal justice. Watch.
The good news is here, it's our legal system in action saying nobody is above the law.
Nobody's above the law, not Republicans and not Democrats, not Donald Trump, not anybody.
I tend to think that nobody is above the law.
No person above the law.
We have political leaders who are not above the law.
We don't believe that anybody should be above the law.
They were all beating the same drum, if you will. No one is above the law.
No one is above the law. Today's evidence is that that includes Trump as well.
New life has been breathed into that saying, no person is above the law.
Let's be completely clear. None of the people you just saw care a thing about justice. Let that word burn in their mouths. No, they are obviously bloodthirsty. They would cheer as you were necklaced in the street. No one is above the law, they would scream as you writhed on the ground. They would. But as long as we're still pretending that the old standards of fairness and equal application of the law apply, then whatever happened to Sam Bankman-Fried? Remember him? Largest financial crime in history? To this day, no one has explained or bothered to even try to tell us how Sam Bankman-Fried was able to make his bail. That was set at $250 million. All that has been disclosed to us, the long-suffering public, is that a former dean at Stanford and a Stanford computer scientist put up $500,000 and $200,000 respectively, and his parents put up the value of their home. So that leaves quite a big gap. Where did the rest of the money come from? No one will tell us. No one in the media is asking because no one cared. Sam Bankman-Fried didn't pay off a former mistress. No, he defrauded 1 million people and ran off with houses in the Bahamas, and yet the system is protecting him because he voted correctly. That's remarkable. But he's not the only criminal that Washington refuses to prosecute. There are so many of them. The people who destroyed the U.S. dollar, for example. The ones who degraded the United States military and turned it into a joke, which it is. The ones who flooded rural America with opioids and killed hundreds of thousands. The people currently selling our oil reserves to China. None of them have ever been prosecuted. In fact, they've all been promoted. We'll have more on them in just a moment. But for now, we'd like to start with Donald Trump, the Republican frontrunner who's been indicted for non-existent crimes in the middle of a presidential race. We have a very specific question about how this is going to affect the race, because, of course, affecting the race is the entire point. Harmeet Dillon has followed all of this closely from the inside. She's the founder of the Dillon Law Group. Harmeet, thanks so much for coming on tonight. So let's start with a specific question germane to the race, in which Donald Trump is engaged. He's the front runner by 30 points. You have seen cases, politicized cases, as with Roger Stone, in which the person charged is gagged by the judge and not allowed to speak about the charges. This is increasingly common, in violation of the First Amendment, obviously, but it happens. If this happens to Donald Trump, he will lose his free speech rights as a candidate in a presidential race. And I'm just wondering if you think that could potentially happen.
Well, it very much could happen. In fact, we've seen it talked about on television already. And in fact, the president has been subject to similar, former president, subject to similar allegations in other litigation that he's involved in, also way beyond the statute of limitations. The story is that because he says mean things about people sometimes on his free speech platforms, that he should not be allowed to speak about a fundamental issue of due process that governs the future of our country and how we look at justice and how we look at the politicization of this political process. And so that would be a gross miscarriage of justice if it occurs, and I would not be surprised to see this politicized prosecutor make that request of this judge.
I honestly think it's impossible to imagine greater election interference, a greater or more aggressive attack on our democracy, than gagging a presidential candidate in a presidential year. I mean, Vladimir Putin has never dreamed of any attack on the United States more damaging than that. Would anyone be able to stop it?
Well, certainly the lawyers in this case will argue against that, and it may be the kind of issue that they seek an immediate appeal on if they lose. But at the end of the day, if a court sets those rules, then, you know, litigant has to abide by them or be in contempt of court. And, you know, that itself would be a very dangerous course to pursue. And so,
yes,
no matter which way you cut it, this entire case, from its inception to its continuation to its now being brought to fruition, what we hear from the New York Times, not from anything that the DA's office has told the defense team, is that there are 30-plus charges. We don't know what they are. The New York Times knows what they are. And so this is not the way that justice is meant to go in the United States. And what I'm afraid of, Tucker, is that this isn't just going to be about Donald Trump. It's going to undermine all citizens' confidence in the rule of law in this country, and that is really tragic.
Yeah, it is, and it has far-reaching and lasting generational consequences that I don't think anyone's thought through. Harmeet Dillon, I appreciate your wise and measured perspective, as always. Thank you.
Thank you.
So you have to ask, given that our entire system has been subverted to stop this one guy from becoming president again, or from serving effectively as president when he had the office, what is this about? Why do they monomaniacally hate Donald Trump so much? Oh, he's obnoxious, he's racist. Okay, right. It's not about that. Here's what it's actually about. Donald Trump challenged the reigning foreign policy orthodoxies as president. He infuriated the neocons who control the State Department and the Pentagon. When he briefly paused arms sales to sacred Ukraine, they impeached him for it. When he ordered troops out of Syria, as was his constitutional right as commander-in-chief, the Pentagon just ignored him. So it's hard not to see Trump's current indictment as an effort to make sure that he can never do anything like that again. He can never tamper with the one thing they care about most, which is their foreign policy, a foreign policy that has not served this country, which has in fact weakened it. Stephen Miller is a former senior advisor to Donald Trump. He's founder of America First Legal. He joins us tonight to assess. Stephen Miller, I just wonder what you think of that. I sort of came to that after watching this Trump saga for the last 7 years. That seems to be the third rail, really, is the foreign policy questions.
Yes, and I lived through it, Tucker. I lived through it by this man's side for those 7 years. The moment that he got the nomination, we watched as the hidden power centers in this country came out from underneath their rocks and began to pull the strings that they control. They began to leak information designed to sabotage him at every turn. They begin to use every organ of control they have in the intelligence community, the national security community, the law enforcement community, to try to control him and to control his presidency. Russia is the central example of this. They tried desperately to keep him from pursuing détente with Russia. They tried desperately to keep him from holding that summit with Vladimir Putin, to try to have a relationship between our two countries. Now look what has happened. Now that he is out of office, we are on the brink of a world war, Tucker. As soon as they pushed him out of office, look what happened. We are now almost in a nuclear conflict over the borders of Ukraine. So you ask me, what is Donald Trump's crime? We know it's not a financial crime. We know it's not a campaign finance crime. His crime is refusing to bow or bend to the corrupt and rotten foreign policy establishment that is used to always getting their way in this country.
And that has much greater control over our system than I think any of us appreciate. I mean, you look at John Cornyn, the Republican senator from Texas, who I think most people, I'll speak for myself, sort of assumed he was kind of conservative. And then you realize, when you view it through the lens of what's happening in Ukraine, John Cornyn and Mitch McConnell and Tom Tillis and almost every Republican senator is a screaming liberal, actually. And if it weren't for foreign policy, you wouldn't know that. You wouldn't know that they are completely aligned with Chuck Schumer and the Democrats and Joe Biden. So there really is a uniparty on the most important questions.
Well, there's obviously an ideological disease that courses through Washington when it comes to foreign policy and the sacrifice of our interest to foreign nations and foreign profits. But it's even deeper than that. And I know this because I also worked on the Hill for almost a decade. The intelligence community is able to manipulate the intelligence process and the relationship with lawmakers in order to obtain the answers that they want from Congress. So when it comes to an issue like the Patriot Act, they can leak what they need to leak, they can push the narratives they need to push, they can manufacture the threats they need to manufacture, and they can work the relationships that they have in order to obtain the outcome that they want. And that has always been true on foreign policy for many, many, many years. Then Donald Trump comes up onto the scene of Washington, a man with whom they have no relationship, a man who has no affinity for them, who doesn't care about them, who doesn't value what they value. And this for them is a panic moment. It is a panic moment. And we are now living in the 7th year of that panic, turning our entire democracy upside down. And I will tell you, if a prosecutor in Manhattan can take control of our entire presidential election process, then by what definition can we say that we even have a democracy in this country?
Right. No, I mean, we were mocked, I thought, justly by the president of El Salvador yesterday, who said, we're not going to take any more lectures about democracy from a country that interferes in its own elections like this. And unfortunately, he's right. He is. Stephen Miller, great to see you tonight. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So again, the irony in everything is irony at this point is that they've been lecturing us for many years about election interference, but you're watching it happen right in front of you. The prosecution of Donald Trump is election interference. He's the Republican frontrunner. Leaks about his imminent arrest began coming out on March 17th. That was just 24 hours after the House Oversight Committee traced $1 million in payments from China to several members of Joe Biden's immediate family. Kind of weird that no one's talking about that now. And the insurrection that happened yesterday in Tennessee and so many other things. So we thought we'd bring in Miranda Devine, a cool-headed reporter from the New York Post who has been on this China cash story since day one. She joins us now. Miranda, thanks so much for coming on. Remind us of this story, which has been lost in the noise, if you would.
Well, this was a bombshell revelation that came from the House Oversight Committee headed by James Comer, and they've been methodically chasing down the money trail from China and other countries to Biden family coffers. And what they found was with one of these payments, a $1 million payment from China, it went through a proxy intimate of the Biden family and then was parceled out to 4 different family members, there being Hunter Biden, his uncle Jim Biden, and his sister-in-law, Hallie Biden, who's the widow of Hunter's late brother with whom he had an affair. And so then there's another account as well with an unnamed Biden. And this money was parceled out over 3 months, 15 different tranches, to disguise it so that it didn't look like what it was, which was a bribe from China. Big story. First time we've really seen flesh on the bones of the money trail. And it was just buried within 24 hours because somebody leaked the story to the media that Trump was about to be arrested. And so all we've seen 24/7 since then is news about Trump. And that works for the Democrats. It works for Joe Biden. You remember in 2020, he hid in the basement and beat Donald Trump because he was had the excuse of COVID. And in 2024, he won't have the excuse of COVID, but what he will have is the excuse of numerous of these Trump legal prosecutions, you know, politicized prosecutions, obviously, and that will just bury any bad news after 4 years of his administration stuffing up pretty much everything that they touch. But we don't hear news about that, and all the other scandals that the House Republicans have uncovered in the last 2 weeks, everything, you know, from the border to more of these Biden scandals to Anthony Fauci's lies, none of it gets any oxygen because Donald Trump is just like crack cocaine to the networks, to the left-wing media. And we also know that if there are any sort of legal outcomes, any accountability that comes for Joe Biden over his family's influence peddling scheme, it will just be dismissed as tit for tat. The Republicans just attacking Donald Trump, attacking Joe Biden on behalf of Donald Trump.
Boy, this country used to be filled with reporters like you, honest and dogged. You're one of the last, and I hope you're rewarded for it someday. Miranda Devine of the New York Post, thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
So as we told you just a moment ago, the single most brazen attack on the First Amendment, your right to have opinions that differ from those of the people in charge, the single most brazen attack ever in our lifetimes from the Biden administration, which is about to send a man to prison for 10 years for making fun of Hillary Clinton. That was his crime. More on that case next. The Douglas Mackey case we told you about at the top of the show really does seem like a turning point for the country. The hallmark of a free society is freedom of speech. You can say what you believe. You don't have to hide what's on your conscience. And above all, you can mock the people in charge. They have to take it because it's not their country. They share it with you. It belongs to all of us. But the hallmark of tyrants is a total lack of sense of humor, for one, and an utter intolerance for dissent. And so to see a man sent to 10 years in prison, and that's what Doug Mackey is facing in the wake of his conviction today, for making fun of Hillary Clinton. And then to see Hillary Clinton herself remain silent. Hillary Clinton apparently is okay with sending a man to prison for 10 years for making fun of her. If you've ever wondered whether she's a cruel and horrible person, the answer is yes, she is. And to see the media remain silent in the face of the most basic of all human rights being violated like this, it lets you know they're on the side of the U.S. government, the Biden administration, punishing people for mocking the party in charge with 10 years in prison. We're not overstating this. We don't think we're getting overheated. We really think this is a pivot point in the history of the United States. Molly Hemingway is editor-in-chief of The Federalist. She joins us with her reaction to what we're seeing in the Doug Mackey case. Molly, thank you so much for coming on. I'm not sure I've seen anything scarier than this.
It's pathetic and sick that this was ever even investigated, that it was prosecuted, and that there are people in New York who care so little about the things that make our country unique that they would vote to convict this person. You know, it just seems like we don't have a country, we don't have rules, we don't have laws. The only thing we have is whether you're with the regime or against the regime.
That's
and
right.
If you're with the regime, you can do anything. You can lay siege to the White House and injure 60 Secret Service officers. You can lay siege to a federal court courthouse in Oregon for months. You can burn down cities. You can, create the Russia collusion hoax, and you'll get awards for it. You can come up with a smear, false about, a justice, someone who's nominated to the Supreme Court being a serial gang rapist, and nothing will happen to you. You can even make jokes about when to vote and how to vote on election day. We see that all the time from people on the left. But if you're on the right, if you upset the regime, all bets are off and anything can happen.
They're breaking the uniparty, I would say, because almost no Republicans have stood up for Doug Mackey today, just for the record. Some have, but very few. The people in charge in Washington are breaking so many things completely, so many fundamental systems that have kept this country afloat and allowed it to thrive for hundreds of years. So you sort of wonder, what do they think the next stage is here? If you put people in prison for making fun of Hillary Clinton, what happens next?
It is really remarkable how much has been destroyed because of the left's refusal to accept in 2016 that people did not support the candidate that they supported. They're willing to burn everything down. They're willing to destroy the country. They're willing to break every precedent and norm because they're still having this temper tantrum, and they are fearful that the people might still have a say in it. But that's precisely what needs to happen, is that the people need to have a say. They need to be able to oust these people from office and positions of power. They need to get their country back. What we have is so precious. What we had is so precious here, from First Amendment protections to an understanding of constitutional due process. And we cannot let people's hatred and obsession take that away from us.
And where are the leaders of the Republican Party? I mean, where's George W. Bush and Jeb Bush and Karl Rove and all the people who are lecturing us on the op-ed page of the Wall Street Journal about what we should do and not do? They're all welcome on the show anytime to stand up against the destruction of the First Amendment. I haven't heard any of them even weigh in on this, and certainly not with outrage, which is warranted.
People need to speak loudly, and people need to understand how serious the threats are that we're facing right now, and how when you see this happening in other countries, this type of persecution of people, bad things happen, and people who care about this country should speak loudly about it.
I agree with that. Have to. In this case, and by the way, anyone who doubts its significance, look at the details. And I think any clean conscience, any decent person will be shocked by what the government did today. Molly Hemingway, thank you so much for that. So as the Republican frontrunner in the presidential race gets indicted on fake charges, Washington refuses to prosecute Democrats who commit felonies that actually have changed the country forever, really hurt the country. People like Toria Nuland, who has brought us to the brink of a nuclear war. What about people like that? We'll consider it next. The hallmark of tyranny is the total distortion of justice. Differences of opinion become felonies for which you can be imprisoned, while actual crimes are described as just business as usual, the way that we do things. And so even as we're trying to throw people in prison for criticizing the Democratic Party, we are allowing people who've hurt this country profoundly to ascend up the ladder of success. There are a million examples of this, but we pick one tonight. Toria Nuland, who's one of the leaders of the State Department, the architect, by the way, of our current war with Russia, was also the architect of the war in Iraq. Now, that war began under false pretenses. More than 1 million people died for no reason, and it destroyed ancient Christian communities in Iraq. Before the war, there were about 1.5 million Christians in that country. Now just a few 100,000 are left. But Nuland was never held to account for any of this. In fact, she was praised, and then she was promoted. So she went back into government service, and she was caught on tape orchestrating a coup in Ukraine. We're not making this up. Here's the tape from 2014.
Yats is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy, what he needs is Klitsch and Tony Book on the outside. He needs to be talking to them 4 times a week, I just think Klitsch going in, he's going to be at that level working for Yatsenyuk. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Okay.
So that's the lady who lectures us about democracy, subverting democracy in a foreign country, getting caught, and then getting an even better job, and then pushing another pointless war in our country, this one against Russia. She's one of the architects of this war. Nuland is driving this nation into a conflict against both Russia and China. We can't win that war. We will lose that war. It will destroy our country. But Victoria Nuland has never been punished for any of this. Once again, she's been promoted. The destruction that she has wrought is really almost beyond fiction. Here she is bragging about blowing up critical infrastructure in Europe. Watch.
Senator Cruz, like you, I am, and I think the administration is very gratified to know that Nord Stream 2 is now, as you like to say, a hunk of metal at the bottom of the sea.
That's just disgusting. And yet no one says a word about it. What does it take to get indicted in Washington? Well, if you're Victoria Nuland, of course, you know you will never be indicted for anything. You'll get some sort of glass ceiling breaking award for women at the State Department. In Washington, you only risk indictment and punishment if you dare to criticize people like Victoria Nuland. And that's the real lesson of what's happening to Donald Trump and his supporters. Their real sin was opposing the people in charge, and particularly in opposing their foreign policy. So using the legal system to stop a political rival in a presidential race is the gravest possible attack on our country's core institutions, the ones that matter. It's election interference. It's an actual threat to democracy. You'd think someone would care. But Nancy Pelosi is celebrating it. Last night she wrote this, the most revealing quote ever on social media. Here it is. No one is above the law, and everyone has the right to a trial to prove innocence. To prove innocence? No. In a free country, this country, the government has to prove guilt. You are innocent until you are proven guilty. But Nancy Pelosi inverts it. Prove your innocence, criminal. And she believes that. They all believe that. You are guilty the moment they come after you, just as in the Soviet Union. And good luck proving your innocence. So you have to ask, where are the adults? Has anyone in authority on the Democratic side, on the neoliberal side, stood up, not for Donald Trump, not for Douglas Mackey, but for our country? We watched carefully today. We didn't hear a single one. Glenn Greenwald has long reported on the political abuses of the legal system. He is the host of System Update on Rumble, and our friend, he joins us tonight. Glenn, you would think somebody would say, look, I don't like Trump, but this is doing grave damage to institutions we're going to need 2 years from now and for the next 100 years. But not one person that we can find has said that.
I heard you in your prior segment saying, where's people like Karl Rove and George Bush and the people who lecture us? I think people like Victoria Nuland demonstrate the theater behind this whole Republican versus Democratic war.
Yes.
This is the key to the whole thing, which is that they are determined not to criminalize conservatism or the Republican Party. They're fine with people like Jeb Bush or John McCain or Mitt Romney or Nikki Haley or Lindsey Graham or whoever. They're determined to criminalize Donald Trump and his movement because the only time Victoria Nuland wasn't in government, she worked for Clinton, then she worked for Dick Cheney, then she worked for Obama, now she worked for Biden, was when Donald Trump was elected president. So that's the only way you get these people out of government, and that's why they're single-mindedly determined to criminalize not the Republican Party, but Donald Trump and his movement, and that's what we saw yesterday with his indictment and today with this person who's now going to prison because of anti-Hillary Clinton memes he posted on Twitter.
The problem is, in organizing the system that way, they cut out the majority of the population. Are the majority of American voters of either party in favor, for example, of going to war with nuclear-armed Russia and China? I don't think there's any evidence the majority is in favor of that. Do you?
No, or for example, keeping troops in Syria, which I would bet you barely anybody even knows that the United States is doing, let alone wants to, and yet Matt Gaetz had a resolution to withdraw all troops from Syria, saying we shouldn't be spending money on that, we should be spending money here at home, and the Republicans and Democrats joined together, the establishment wings, to say, no, we want to let Joe Biden keep troops in Syria. It's the establishment wings of both parties that are the real enemy, and they're the ones who rule no matter what you go and do at the voting booth. Donald Trump was the only one who could disrupt it, and that's why they want to criminalize that movement.
That's exactly right. I mean, if you were just to write out the crimes of Donald Trump, being obnoxious, okay, versus the crimes of Victoria Nuland, destroying the West, you know, one list would be longer than the other, but who's getting indicted? Glenn Greenwald, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thanks, Tucker.
Very much. So the QAnon shaman, Jacob Chansley, was the most famous person arrested on January 6th. He was released from prison yesterday. On the very same day, there was an actual insurrection at the state capitol in Tennessee. Kind of an amazing juxtaposition that we'll explore after the break.
to do more to stop gun violence. It's ripping our communities apart, ripping the soul of this nation, ripping at the very soul of the nation. And we have to do more to protect our schools so they aren't turned into prisons. You know, the shooter in this situation reportedly had 2 assault weapons and a pistol, 2 AK-47. So I call on Congress again to pass my assault weapons ban.
So we're going to prevent you from learning why the shooter did it, and we don't have to guess because she wrote a whole manifesto about why she did it. And we know that she did that because she told a friend of hers on Instagram that she did it. But we can't see it. We can only talk about the guns. We can't know what kind of drugs she was taking, what kind of hormones or SSRIs or benzodiazepines. We can only guess. We can only talk about the guns. Pass my assault weapons ban. That'll fix the problem. But Joe Biden is lying about that. He knows that he's lying, and you know that he's lying. Yesterday's massacre did not happen because of lax gun laws. Yesterday's massacre happened because of a deranged and demonic ideology that is infecting this country with the encouragement of people like Joe Biden. Let's start by being honest about that. Tulsi Gabbard is in Nashville tonight, and she joins us. Congressman, thank you so much for coming on. It seems calculated that the authorities in Nashville and the national authorities are withholding from us and stopping any conversation among us about why this happened. Wouldn't that be the first question that any rational person would ask?
Yes, Tucker, it has to be. And I can only imagine that, you know, for the families and the students here, I'm standing here at the Covenant School entryway behind me, seeing them coming in and paying their respects to the memorial that's been set up there, offering flowers there, questioning why did this happen. And as you mentioned, it is so important for us as a society, as a country, to confront that question with the truth. You know, we see this so-called woke trans ideology, this agenda of sexualizing our kids at very young ages being pushed across the country, and this dangerous message to our kids saying that, hey, if you are being taught traditional values, whether it be by, you know, your teachers or your parents, you are a victim of child abuse. And that's what it looks like what happened here, that this shooter seems like they felt justified because they were a victim, and therefore they felt they had to go and take this action based on retribution to go after, you know, the so-called abusers. The real child abuse that's happening here is coming from those who are seeking to sexualize our kids, again, at younger and younger ages. And the message that this tragedy, unfortunately, sends to us all, and the message that those you're talking about are trying to send is, watch out, be careful. You will not only be canceled, but now you face the threat of violence or even worse, death. We have to have the courage to confront this truth. We, as a society, have to have the courage to protect our kids, understanding that we can't allow them to intimidate us if we hope to provide a future for our kids, to provide a future in this country.
This doesn't sound like a liberation movement to me. I think most Americans, I'll speak for myself, are instinctively sympathetic to anything that liberates us. But this seems like a movement inspired by hate, and we know that by the reaction to the murder of the most innocent among us yesterday. If it's impossible for certain groups to say unequivocally, this is evil, then I think that tells you something about their motive and where they're coming from.
It really does. Again, this comes to the core interest that we should all share, which is what is in the best interest of our kids. How can we as a society protect them and allow our kids to be kids and protect their innocence? We see those who are trying to push this agenda on the most innocent, the most impressionable among us for their own nefarious purposes. They are the ones who are enacting this abuse. They are the ones who are motivated not by good, not by love, but instead by darkness and hate.
I think darkness is the word. I think it's exactly right. Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard joining us tonight from Nashville. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tucker.
So there is a lot going on the, it's not even clear whether it's fair to call it the left, but the true extremist fringe in this country, and it's not all trans people, of course, but the extremist trans fringe is a lot more threatening than most people understand. Andy Ngo has been covering Antifa for years now. He's the author of Unmasked, Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy. He's a senior editor at Post Millennial. He joins us tonight. Andy, thanks so much for coming on. So again, you don't want to get too broad brush here, but there is an extremist movement, obviously. It's very evident online in the aftermath of this mass murder. Are you surprised to see it?
No. So in my reporting on Antifa for years now, one observation that I noticed was that disproportionately the number of riot arrestees are gender diverse, and by that I mean they don't identify with their biological sex. On some nights it was as high as 20%, and that is magnitudes higher than what the data we have on people in the wider American population who are trans-identifying. So, I looked into this a bit further. There's some peer-reviewed research out of Canada. You can find it on the Library of Medicine that shows that there's evidence that young transgender people are particularly vulnerable to violent radicalization. And in my reporting on left-wing extremism, for months now, I've documented and tracked this surge in violent rhetoric by self-identified trans militant activists, particularly on Twitter, in response to various states restricting or banning the medical transitioning of minors. As you mentioned earlier, the horrific murder of children and staff at the Christian school yesterday does come just days ahead of a so-called Trans Day of Vengeance that's being organized in the U.S. Capitol. And unfortunately, myself and other people who have reported on this and posted this flyer, which, by the way, that group is still online. If you posted the flyer, regardless of the context, you're locked out of your account. So currently, I cannot access my Twitter.
Can I ask you just a quick macro question? So one of the reasons that so many well-meaning middle-aged moms in this country have bought into support of the trans community is on the basis of the promise that it's liberation, and this is kids, when they finally express their true inner identity, will be happier and better adjusted. But the incidence of violence and mental illness seems to be extraordinary. So it doesn't seem like people are being liberated. It seems like people are being tormented and driven to the brink of insanity. That, just watching, that seems clear.
It's the exact opposite of liberation. We have mountains of evidence that people who suffer from gender dysphoria also suffer from very high rates of mental health comorbidities. When you have this reality on top of people being fed cross-sex hormones and are also being in an environment where they are encouraged to have a violent hatred of wider society, and you can see this in the reaction before, during, and after this killing.
Andy Ngo, thank you for your incisive and very informed analysis of this. Appreciate it. So there are obviously really important conversations that the entire country needs to have about the transgender movement, which is increasing in velocity, and about the overwhelming prevalence of doctor-prescribed pharmaceuticals in American households. Do they play a role in this? It seems like they do. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about taking the shotgun from under your bed and making you a felon for having it. The assault weapons ban. More on that straight ahead. We told you in the open about Thursday's show, in which we noted some pretty remarkable and we thought significant reports from NPR, the state's funded broadcaster that really is the mouthpiece of the neoliberal establishment. So first, NPR complained about a trans person being evicted without mentioning that this very same person had shot a police officer in the head, because the trans community can do no wrong even when they shoot cops. And then, at the same time they were calling for disarming you, NPR told trans people to hurry up and formed armed militias. Watch. Here's that same National Public Radio, state media, controlled by the Biden administration, encouraging people to go to the gun store immediately. But not all people, just trans people. Guns are bad, except in the hands of trans people. Wow. Here's more.
Groups like Rainbow Reload exist around the country, often called Pink Pistol Clubs. It's a place for experts and the gun curious to practice and improve shooting. But this goes beyond hobby. There's a practical goal here, to prepare and protect themselves.
If the world is dangerous, then you have to be dangerous back. And that very much has pushed me into where I am now.
So that segment aired Thursday night, and trans groups across the country made fun of it, mocked it. The Rainbow Youth Project said that we are, quote, afraid gun-toting trans people will start political violence. Well, we were concerned about that, and for good reason, it turns out. Jason Rantz joined us last week for that segment. He joins us again now. Jason, this is kind of the last trend you want to be right about, but it was obvious, it seemed.
It is. When you tell people they're targets, they're going to act like targets. Now, most people will not turn to violence themselves, right? They'll maybe unnecessarily live in fear. They will responsibly arm themselves, and that's it. Nothing happens. But there will always be the threat of a small percentage of people who will act out unreasonably or destructively. And perhaps that's what we ended up seeing this week.
When you tell people they're a target, they'll act like a target. They will either live in fear or they'll act out. I think that's absolutely right. And that goes for any group, by the way. I would feel that way. Why wouldn't I? So what would be the point in telling people that? Like, that's so obvious. Why would you do that?
Yeah, I think there's two reasons. Number one, it does sometimes feel intentional, like you are trying to ratchet up all of those feelings. They started to do this with Trump supporters, where they were effectively in the media trying to get them to act out violently so they can go out and say, hey, see, right-wingers are violent. In this case, when you have someone who is pursuing a political agenda, I don't necessarily know if they're always intentional in doing this. And look, I'll be good faith in this. I don't think everyone is intentionally trying to instill this violence, but the end result is still the same, whether that's intent or not. And, you know, it fits into the oppressor-oppressed narrative that the left wing likes to push. And even if it could end up resulting in something like this, they seem to be okay with it or justify it because the end goal, they believe, is something that we need to get to, which is unfettered access to gender-affirming care regardless of the age of the individual. And I think that ultimately that's dangerous. And to your point, it's not just about trans people. It's literally any group. When you tell them they're a target of a threat that doesn't actually exist, you cannot always determine how they're going to react.
That's exactly right. And in this case, there's no evidence that that threat is real, as you know and as you've reported. Jason Rantz, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Tucker. Appreciate it.
So Joe Biden wasted no time, and Joe Biden, whatever you think of him, really his signature quality is the willingness to say anything, literally anything. And he jumped into this tragedy, the mass murder of Christian children, to demand the seizure of all effective rifles in the United States. And today his press secretary, who like him will say anything, repeated it.
We need Republicans in Congress to show some courage. This is what they owe these parents. This is what they owe these family members who are losing their loved ones. They need to show courage. We need gun safety laws, comprehensive gun safety laws. We need to ban assault rifles. Those weapons of war do not belong on our streets. They do not belong in schools. And again, this is unacceptable, and you're going to continue to hear from the president call this out.
The brazenness of a moral lecture from that person hours after these children are murdered by the ideology they promote. It's almost beyond description. Clay Noir is an advocate for the Second Amendment. He's seen a lot of these, probably not shocked as we are, joins us tonight to respond to it. This does seem, even by the standards of the Disarm the Population group, this does seem pretty shameless.
No, it really is, especially considering the amount of information that people have now with respect to the stats. Like, the vast majority of these shootings are committed with handguns. I mean, we're talking the vast majority. So for them to follow it up immediately after and talk about what is used a fraction of the time in these shootings, it kind of speaks very loudly to how disingenuous they are about actually looking for a solution. They're trying to get a goal, and the goal essentially is to get gun control. That's really all they care about. So it's almost as if they wait for these types of tragedies to happen so that they can leverage it to get their goal. Because if we were talking solutions, we wouldn't be talking about a gun that's used a fraction of the time in these types of shootings. We'd be talking about, okay, how do we take what are soft targets and make them hard? We're like, it's not even mentioned. And then when it's brought up, they say things like, well, we don't want our schools to look like prisons. Why are we talking aesthetics when we're talking about the safety of our children?
Can I ask a question? Like, what if you really cared about the murder of innocents? And I think most people, I do, people who disagree with me and everything, I think people do care. But if you were rational about it, you would want to know all the factors that led to it, and you'd want a tox screen from the blood of the killer. Like, a lot of these people seem like they're on an awful lot of pharmaceuticals. What are those pharmaceuticals? Why can't we know that? And if they describe their motive in writing in a manifesto, why can't we see that? I don't understand. I mean, we're being lied to while the children haven't even been buried yet. I don't know why no one else is offended by that.
You know, that's interesting you said that, Tucker. I actually was talking with a good friend of mine, and he stated the same thing. He was like, all of these things have been released to us rather quickly. We have the video of the cops actually taking down the suspect. We have all of this information, except for the information that really matters most to get to the deeper issue involved here. Because you got to think about the type of mentality and mindset of somebody who can look at a child, point a gun at them, and pull the trigger. That's dark. Or possibly there's something else going on here, but we don't know. We can't get any insight because, as you pointed out succinctly, we don't have that information and they don't want to give it to us.
But they never want to explain why anything happens. Why did 9/11 happen? I still don't know. I honestly don't. I mean that. They hate our freedoms. Okay, but what's the... Really? Was there more to it than that? Why did Russia invade Ukraine? It seemed like kind of counterintuitive. Why'd they do that? Why did these mass shootings happen? Well, I mean, maybe there's a reason, but why aren't we talking about it? Seriously.
Well, because I think you maintain more control if you can control the narrative. And you can't control the narrative when you have the truth, because the truth will supersede the narrative if the narrative doesn't line up with the truth. So, of course, I'm going to shield you from the truth so I can control the narrative and get you to do what I want.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But in a democracy, you can't lie to the population. Okay, that's not allowed because it's a self-governing country, so you can't do that, but they do it. Colleen Noir, I appreciate your coming on tonight. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
So at the core of America is not an economy, it's a belief system. It's a diverse belief system, but across religious affiliations and racial groups, Americans have always had basically the same views on the basic things. And those views are changing pretty dramatically. You probably got this texted to you in the last couple of days. We're going to show you the numbers from a remarkable new poll on what Americans think about their lives. Straight ahead. Did an incredibly depressing, in fact, so sad that we almost didn't do the segment, poll on changing American attitudes. And what's so striking is how quickly they have changed and how profoundly. Example, in 1998, 70% of Americans said patriotism was very important. That number's now under 60%. The same year, more than 60% of Americans said that religion was very important to them. That number has plummeted to below 40. The poll also showed, critically, if you care about continuing the country, that the importance of having children had fallen off a cliff as well. So these are fundamental attitudes. These are not your view on the next tax bill. These are your views on civilization itself. Victor Davis Hanson is a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution and one of the smartest people we know. He joins us tonight. Professor, what do you make of these numbers?
Well, the short-term drop-off in 2019, where people express a lack of confidence in the economy or their futures or their children will be better, I think is more attributable to this trifecta, this disastrous last 3 years of the COVID lockdowns, which is a disaster, the George Floyd 120 days of rioting, and the Biden destruction of the economy. But your point is the longer trends, and I think that reflects the fact that, first of all, we have 50 million people and never had so many people that were not born in the United States, and we have failed to assimilate them and integrate them, number one. And then number two, all of our institutions are controlled by a bi-coastal globalist elite who have pounded into young people in academia and K through 12 that they're quote-unquote citizens of the world, that borders are not important, there's nothing exceptional or singular about America. That's the message that they've grown up with. They don't know anything about Gettysburg or the Star-Spangled Banner or Thomas Edison or any of that. It's just shocking. There's also another divide, Tucker. Independents and Republicans, especially older ones, reflect the traditional American values of religion, family, hard work, as opposed to Democrats. And this is not, that reminds us, this Democratic Party is not JFK or even Bill Clinton. This is a radical leftist utopian global party that has told the youth of America that the affluence and the leisure that they take for granted just comes out of nowhere, and they don't have to reinvest in it or love the country or work hard or practice civic education and dutiful, patriotism. They think that's their birthright. And so we have this weird disconnect of very affluent, blessed, leisured people having no idea where that came from or no appreciation or gratitude to the past generation who gave it to them. The only good thing I saw out of it was there was skepticism about biological males competing and hijacking women's sports. People were tired of the psychodramas and the melodramas of the transgender pronouns. Yeah. They were skeptical of racial quotas. But other than that, I think it was pretty negative.
People not wanting to have children seems like the most profound expression of nihilism and sadness, deep, deep sadness. If you're cheerful and hopeful, you want to pass on your birthright to the next generation. Wouldn't you think?
Absolutely. That's the common thread from the Roman Empire to the Byzantine Empire. What destroyed all of them was their fertility rates. And when you get down to 1.6 where we are, and it was 2.1 just in the 90s, then it shows you have a crisis of confidence and people are unhappy. They don't know what their country's about. They don't know about their community, and they're not having children. They're concentrating and dwelling on self. That is the message of the left, that it's you, you. You're the victim. You're the oppressor. And you don't need to sacrifice for anybody else, especially a next generation. So that's very disturbing, because that's what implodes a civilization, when it commits collective suicide through demography.
Yeah, drowning in Lake Me. Victor Davis Hanson, thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. So Hillary Clinton, does she want to run for president again? It's interesting. Maybe. Who knows? We thought we would talk to someone who worked for her for years, who helped run the Clinton White House, one of the Democrats we remain in touch with, an old school character and a very smart person, and a decent person too, pollster Doug Schoen. And if anyone can kind of explain what's going on with Hillary Clinton, past, present, or future, it is him. We talked to him for an hour for Tucker Carlson today. Here's part of it. I've seen candidates who have wives who are tolerating the political career, and I've seen a lot of candidates whose wives are driving the political career.
And you mentioned Bill Clinton before. Hillary was in both categories. She drove the political process because she understood it was in her interest to push Bill Clinton forward, hence the 60 Minutes interview during the 92 campaign. But Hillary also, having created the problems with health care, understood that she was a retardant, harmful at that point to Bill's career, and she made it clear, I'm not participating. I got you in this mess. You've got to get it out your own way.
It's interesting. She does have some qualities that I personally admire. I'll say I think she's tough.
Yep.
If she keeps going.
Yep.
She also has loyal staff.
Yes, she does.
Unlike her husband.
Yep.
And longtime staff. So I do appreciate that. But she never seemed naturally suited for politics.
She wasn't. The analogy I offered was the two students. Bill Clinton was the one who did best in the open book exam, where he could think. She was the one who would memorize and then regurgitate. Now, she has a very good mind. She's focused and she's disciplined, but she's not a particularly creative thinker.
Right.
And she's had so many different incarnations. She ran first as a centrist, then she tried to run to the left. Nothing quite worked because she wasn't authentic.
But so why did she want it? I don't there's
she
so
was
many
far
things.
more ambitious than Bill, and Bill was pretty darn ambitious.
Huh. So she just always thought she should be at a high level in politics.
She absolutely, it was clear, felt she had a calling.
We're learning the details of a horrifying and potentially political attack from over the weekend. A staffer for Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky was stabbed in Washington, D.C. Fox's Trace Gallagher has the story for us right now. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Tucker, right now it appears to be random. The victim, Philip Todd, who works for Senator Rand Paul, says he was walking with a friend in D.C. when a man now identified as 42-year-old Glenn Neal walked up, didn't say or demand anything, and began stabbing him in the head and chest, causing life-threatening injuries. And Glenn Neal had just been let out of prison 24 hours earlier. He served 12 years for forcing 2 women into prostitution and threatened to kill them if they did not comply. There's more. Thanks to the group Virginia for Safe Communities, we have Glenn Neal's rap sheet. He has been arrested and charged at least 22 times. 14 for burglary, twice for auto theft, twice for assaulting a police officer, once for illegal gun possession, once for drug possession, and once for compelling prostitution. Even if all these crimes were committed in areas with far left prosecutors, sentencing guidelines say he should still be in prison. In fact, just last month, Neal had a parole violation dismissed in a Chicago federal court, so he avoided more time. Maybe that's why Glenn Neal's nickname is Lucky. It appears to work for him, not for us. Tucker.
Trace Gallagher, thank you for that sad story.
Yep.
So details are starting to trickle out about the human cost of the COVID era disaster, tragedy, our own cultural revolution. We spend most of our time talking about the big things, but underneath it all were millions of people suffering, some in grotesque ways. Here's one example. At Georgetown Law School, administrators demanded that students wear masks at all time. No one was allowed to drink water in class. Students, of course, had to take the shots, whether they wanted or not, and then the booster. So one top student at the law school, called William Spruance, questioned those policies on the grounds they didn't seem rational or scientifically justified. Administrators did not respond to his arguments. Instead, they suspended him. They then forced him to undergo a psychiatric evaluation and threatened to report him to the bar to prevent him from becoming a lawyer. He made it out. William Spruance is now a practicing attorney, and he's written an amazing piece for the Brownstone Institute called Madness in Law Schools. He joins us tonight. William Spruance, thank you so much for coming on. They forced you to undergo a psychiatric evaluation?
Thank you for having me tonight, Tucker. Yes, so after I was encouraged to give a speech to a student council type group at Georgetown, I received an email that I was indefinitely suspended from the school, that I'd have to undergo psychiatric evaluation and waive my right to medical confidentiality. During the psychiatric evaluation, it would start with kind of innocuous questions like, do you ever get angry? Followed by, do you get angry about masks? And then, do masks make you want to hurt anybody? So it was an ongoing cycle of questions that were designed to make me seem unhinged for being willing to question their COVID policies.
So we took a look, actually, at the speech that you gave, and people can find it online. They can also find your piece, and I hope they will. It was entirely rational. You were asking questions about the science. You turned out to be completely right. Were any administrators at the Georgetown Law Center willing to entertain a rational conversation with you?
I found that individual professors were willing to have the conversation with me behind closed doors, but they wished to remain anonymous. As for the administrators, there was no such luck. While ostensibly this was about COVID, it was really part of a much larger cycle of events at Georgetown Law. We had people like Sandra Sellers and Ilya Shapiro who were thrown out of the institution just for being willing to question campus orthodoxies. And it was part of an ongoing double standard where if you're progressive and you regurgitate the proper slogans, then there's an indemnity built into shouting down speakers. This was on full display at Stanford a few weeks ago. But if you're willing to question the orthodoxy of campus, then they'll bring the whole horde of administrators against you and work to professionally and socially and reputationally destroy you. And that's how I saw my issue, which happened in August and September of 2021. Just 4 months later, Ilya Shapiro was kicked off of campus for questioning President Biden's decision to limit his Supreme Court nominations to just black women.
So you went to a prestigious undergraduate college. You get into one of the best law schools in the country. How shaken was your faith in our legal education system by this?
Well, I thought I was attending a trade school for a skeptical profession. I think in the long run, it's hard to be optimistic about the future judges and administrators and unimpressive bureaucrats because Georgetown Law is really just an incubator for an unimpressive ruling class of tomorrow. And so these people won't stay on campus and just make the people there miserable. They'll be running institutions like Georgetown Law. They will be at various government agencies. They'll be judges. And that, to me, is the more alarming aspect. I made it out of this process relatively unharmed. I mean, it was about a week that was difficult in my life. But going forward, people have come out to me since my piece was released about similar stories, and they're gone through far worse than me. And at the root of this is the administrators, and that's where these students and these professors and these administrators will go on to inflict more damage, which is why I wrote for the Brownstone Institute, which is hoping to curb this tide as soon as possible.
What's most amazing is you're one of the only graduates of an elite law school brave enough to describe what you saw there. And that itself is such an indictment, really, I think, of your classmates and the people who run it. And so we're especially grateful that you're willing to do this. William Spruance, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me on, Tucker.
So we're happy to announce good news. Kamala Harris's husband, the second gentleman, got a new wardrobe today. And as noted, we're pretty excited about it. We'll show you what it is next. Part of the reason you have seen a rise in a completely crazy and utterly destructive transgenderist ideology is because it's being funded, promulgated, promoted by the U.S. government, including at our military bases, the ultimate grotesque humiliation of the country. Congressman Matt Gaetz questioned the so-called Secretary of Defense about it today on Capitol Hill. Watch the lying. Matt Gaetz joins us next. If you wanted to destroy the most powerful military in the world, what would you do? Well, among the many things you might try is hosting drag queen story hours on military bases for kids. And today, Congressman Matt Gaetz, who represents maybe more uniformed military than anybody in the Congress, confronted the Defense Secretary about it directly. Watch.
How much taxpayer money should go to fund drag queen story hours on military bases?
You know, drag queen story hours is not something that the department funds.
Well, wait a second. That's actually not what the record seems to suggest. You were going to fund one at Ramstein Air Force Base. That one got canceled, but that's DOD insignia. That's a drag queen story hour for children. Then also at Malmstrom Air Force Base outside of Great Falls, Montana, you had a drag queen story hour for kids. Who funded these things, Mr. Secretary?
Listen, drag shows are not something that the Department of Defense supports or funds.
Yeah, a liar. Board member to defense contractor before he got this job. So then Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, admitted that he was not aware military bases were hosting drag queen story hours. Watch this.
Can I get copies of those? Because I'd like to take a look at those myself, actually. Take a look and find out what actually is going on there. Because that's the first I'm hearing about that kind of stuff. I don't read those news stories. I don't know what you're talking about. I'd like to take a look at those because I don't agree with those.
Well, they're now in the official record.
Shouldn't be happening. Period.
Thank you. Thank you for that admission.
Yeah. Actually, you'd like to go. You know, not an open-minded guy. Matt Gaetz represents North Florida in the U.S. Congress. Even if he never passes a bill, it's worth having him there just for moments like this. It's just amazing. What was your, being on the questioning side, what was your feeling about their responses?
America's top military leaders have brought misery to almost every part of the globe they have touched. They put Iran in a position of power in Iraq. They armed ISIS in Syria. They turned over Afghanistan to the Taliban in the bloodiest way possible. We could have taken out the suicide bomber, didn't give the authorities. They didn't even get the vengeance part right, Tucker. When they were supposed to take out ISIS, they took out a family on the way to a barbecue. And so now you see them trying to bring the misery and the ruin home to our country through this embrace of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this is real money. $70 million they've requested for enhancements to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this is the most divisive stuff possible. And when I showed the Secretary of Defense evidence that it was happening in Nevada, in Montana, in Virginia, he just said, nope, it's not happening. And it makes you wonder, do these people have any sense of reality, or is the pain the point, whether it's DEI or the vaccine mandate, that they still don't have good answers for?
But in the end, it means that nobody wants to join the military, and their recruiting numbers are dangerously down. Do they see a connection between their reckless, crazy behavior and the unwillingness of people to join up voluntarily?
We are in a recruiting collapse, and they say, well, we don't think DEI is the problem because we've sent out surveys and no one says it's the problem. They don't realize that the people offended by this conduct aren't going to take their stupid survey. Let me just be honest. A great share of the people who fight in our military come from the American South. And when you embrace these values that are so antithetical to the part of the country I represent, you are really putting a downward pressure on the people we need to volunteer and fight, not for some faraway land, not to go build some democracy out of sand in Arabia, but for our country. And you have to wonder whether it is incompetence or a purposeful purge. I also pressed them on making sure we get our service members their full back pay and restoration of rank. Austin said he would not do that in the absence of a legal requirement to do so. So that is precisely the amendment I intend to offer to our National Defense Authorization Act.
Yeah. When you say you hate white men, you do kind of wonder, like, who's going to fight the wars then? Because that's who's always fought the wars. Actually.
Well, General Milley maybe didn't go to the drag queen show because he was too busy getting in touch with his white rage still. Who knows? Yeah. But he gets credit for saying he wants to shut him down.
Loathsome. Matt Gaetz, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So Mark Milley says he didn't know there were drag queen story hours going on at military bases, but maybe more significantly, he's also not sure where all the weapons that we're sending to Ukraine have wound up. So yesterday, Joe Manchin, Democrat from West Virginia, asked Milley if he could speak to his, quote, confidence in the U.S. NATO Ukrainian weapons accountability. Here was his response.
We do not have any uniformed troops or civilians, for that matter, accompanying Ukrainian forces in the front line. We do have folks working out of the embassy, so they're working at the Ministry of Defense level, and that's as far as our hands-on accountability goes. We do have some other means through reporting that the Ukrainians report to us, and I'll be happy to talk about that in a classified session, but there are some means and mechanisms of doing some accountability. It is not as rigorous as you might think.
Yeah, not as rigorous. J.D. Vance has served for the United States Marine Corps. Now he serves in the United States Senate, representing the state of Ohio. He joins us tonight. Senator, thank you so much for coming. So when you hear the chairman of the Joint Chiefs say we're not exactly sure where the advanced weapon systems are going, how do you feel about that?
Well, Tucker, it's outrageous, but unfortunately it confirms what we basically already know, which is that we've sent $113 billion, probably more than that, Tucker, probably more like $130 billion to the most corrupt country on the face of the planet, and we have no real idea how those resources have been spent. The most important part of this, Tucker, and I've done a very deep dive into this, is we do not make enough bullets in this country to support multiple fronts of multiple wars. When I'm talking about bullets, I mean ammunition, munitions, artillery shells, some of the advanced missile systems. So when we talk about sending $120 billion worth of weapons to Ukraine, those are weapons that we could not send to Taiwan or other parts of the world that would actually be in the service of American national interest. This entire idea that we can focus on Russia and we can focus on China is a farce. These guys shipped our entire industrial base to China in the first place. We don't make enough of our own weapons, and the fact that we're sending it to Ukraine with so little accountability is the very reason why China's threat and power is growing in the world today.
Yeah, and we're about to lose the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency and tank our economy. I agree with that. I wonder, has there been a concerted effort from the Congress to find out who's gotten rich from this? Many people have, clearly. Do we know who they are?
We don't know who they are, Tucker, in part because the Biden administration won't give us answers. I actually submitted a letter. One of the first things that I did as a U.S. Senator is asked for a full accounting of where the resources that we've sent to Ukraine have gone. The Biden administration has been very resistant, even in classified settings, to be honest with us. And Tucker, I have to be honest with you. I'm not sure if it's because they have no idea where those $120 billion have gone or if they just don't want to tell us. But what we can be almost certain is that some very dark, very evil people have gotten very wealthy from that $120 billion. I hope that it's done some good too, but the simple fact is we don't know, and there has not been a full accounting of this stuff.
It's the recklessness is just awe-inspiring. I mean, it's just drunk driving the whole country. I mean, it's unbelievable. Senator Vance of Ohio, I appreciate your coming on tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
So you never want to believe that the core institution in American life, which is the justice system, is being used for political ends to destroy and bankrupt people who might speak up against the Democratic Party. But we're starting to see that, particularly with civil suits, which are now a tool in the Democratic arsenal to shut up its critics. Tara Reade accused Joe Biden of sexual assault credibly, and now they're going after her. She joins us next. The liberal establishment has decided it can't win arguments. Nobody wants what they're selling at all, so why even bother to convince anybody? So instead, they're going right to force, and you're seeing that all over our country. And one of the ways they're inflicting force on people, inflicting pain, is through civil suits. Bring them to civil court, because anyone can file a lawsuit. And so there are a lot of well-funded lawsuits trying to shut people up or punish them for stepping out of line. And here's the latest example. This has not gotten enough coverage. So Tara Reade once worked for Joe Biden. He sexually assaulted her, and she made possibly the mistake of saying so out loud. You're not allowed to do that. So in retaliation against her, the New York Times posted her social security number on her website. Can you imagine the ramifications of that? So Tara Reade sued the New York Times because you can't put people's social security numbers on a website. But a federal judge has now ruled against Tara Reade and said that she has to pay the legal fees of the New York Times. So they're still trying to crush her. And we think it's wrong. She joins us now. Thanks so much for coming on. Did I misstate any of that? I mean, it seems like you came out and accused the sitting president of a sex crime, and we've spoken at great length about this on the air, and I don't think there's any question that it happened. You said so at the time, and now they're trying to hurt you for saying that. That's what it looks like to me.
Yes, this is just one of the many things that they've done, to try to silence me. But yeah, the lawsuit that I filed was because on the first story that they did, the New York Times, and they used me as basically a whipping post all of 2020 to try to silence and discredit me. But the first story was on Easter Sunday, and I was woken up very early in the morning by a friend who lived back east and said, hey, the online story on New York Times has your congressional ID showing your social security number. We need to get it down. It took a few hours. We got it down, and they did comply with taking it down, but it was very awful. So I did try to file a lawsuit. I lost. The judge ruled that it was in the public interest to print it, and I then was slapped with attorney's fees from New York Times, upwards close to over $71,000. So. Yeah.
So you are not a rich person, I know from our conversations.
No.
So just two quick questions. How is it in the public's interest for the New York Times to publish your social security number of all private things?
Well, suddenly, I guess there was a great interest in freedom of speech, so in freedom of the press. So freedom of the press would be the impetus for that, and sort of a more of a legal argument. And I don't want to bore your audience with all of that, but there's been different ways that the Biden administration has come after me. They've come after me with the DOJ, with sealed warrants on my Twitter, which are of record, and there's been a little bit of press about that. They took my communications on Twitter and all of that. So yeah, it's been watching Joe Biden take a wrecking ball to I've been experiencing this wrecking ball to my life, but now I've been watching the last couple of years take a wrecking ball to the United States, including the proxy war that Russia and that NATO is and U.S. is fighting against Russia, and upwards of $100 billion going over there when we have dire circumstances here. So all of those things that I talked about, that I criticized Joe Biden about, besides the awful experience of being sexually assaulted by him when I was a Senate staffer in 1993, people are seeing just the true Joe Biden of how corrupt this regime is. And if there needs to be any regime change, it doesn't need to be in other countries. It needs to happen here. Now,
I agree.
I
agree.
Yeah.
We're seeing how cruel and ruthless they are. And not only they don't believe all women, they will hurt women who disobey. And you're a perfect example.
And further, Tucker, the New York Times has become, the legacy media has become like an arm of the Biden administration, like the DOJ and the FBI. I mean, look at what just happened to Matt Taibbi, who testified about, the different ways that they were trying to suppress U.S. citizen speech and using taxpayer money to do it and control the conversation and control the narrative. He got visited by an IRS agent the day of his testimony. So
they send the IRS to your house.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm not. So we're all waiting for that, and I know that you are. You're living it now. Terry, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So in case you wondered whether feminism is dead, men are now dominating sports, and so-called feminists are cheering it on. A male cyclist just won an all-female cycling event by pretending to be a woman. One of his competitors, an actual woman who was just cheated, joins us next. Not so long ago, most people didn't really have a clear sense of what artificial intelligence was. Tonight, there's a growing consensus that AI could be the single greatest threat to the future of humanity. Elon Musk has been saying that for quite a while. Now he joins other tech leaders in saying it even more loudly. Fox's Kevin Corke has a story for us tonight. Hey, Kevin.
Evening, Tucker. While some people obviously believe that the rapid pace of AI development is really no big deal, there are a number of global tech titans who think it's a major concern that needs to be addressed right here and right now. In fact, in an open letter from the Future of Life Institute signed by Elon Musk, Steve Wozniak, and Andrew Yang, AI Labs has been urged to cease training models that are more powerful than GPT-4 for at least 6 months. In the letter they write, should we automate away all of the jobs, including the fulfilling ones? Should we develop non-human minds that might eventually outnumber, outsmart, obsolete, and replace us? Should we risk loss of control of our civilization? Then they add this: such decisions must not be delegated to unelected tech leaders. Now, back in October of 2022, the White House actually issued its own blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights, which was celebrated by some as a framework and then promptly vilified for others for being non-binding. By the way, GPT-4 is already showing proficiency in conversation, song composition, even document summation. AI's future is here right now, Tucker.
It's really one of the defining stories of this moment. We're gonna spend a lot more time on it soon. Kevin Corke, thank you for that.
You bet.
Well, speaking of science, one of the most basic facts of science is that men have some innate physical advantages over women. Strength is one of them. That's biology. But when you're God, you control biology. And NPR is on the side of people who believe they're God. So this weekend they published this report. Quote, the International Governing Body for Track and Field will ban trans women athletes from elite women's competitions despite limited scientific evidence of physical advantage. Okay, trust the science. Don't believe biology. ESPN, in that same vein, just honored a guy called William Thomas in their Celebrating Women's History Month segment. Watch. Another win for the patriarchy. Yay, patriarchy. And here's another. This month, a man dressed as a woman won a majoring cycling competition in New York. Holly Lavisser is a competitive cyclist who is a woman. She joins us tonight. Holly, thank you so much for coming on. I know there's enormous pressure to be quiet and know your place as an actual woman. Why are you coming on tonight?
I'm hoping to encourage other women to start speaking out. I know that I get a lot of support, and I can't be the only one. The more voices we have that speak out about how unfair this is, I'm hoping that we'll start to get some traction and have governing bodies listen. It started in some sports, which is great, but we need more.
Can you, I mean, this is such obvious cheating, it's cheating, that can you imagine a day where actual women competing in women's sports just leave and women's sports are all men dressed as women competing against each other?
Women are already leaving. I know personally of women that have left because there's no fulfillment anymore when you show up and a competition is not fair, it's unjust.
The thing about cycling and swimming is they're so physically demanding. I mean, I assume you spent a lot of your life training. I mean, how bitter is it to be beaten by someone who's cheating?
It's just so unfair. I train every day in some capacity. I work a full-time job, so it's definitely a balance to get my training in. I make nutritional choices so that I can compete at my best ability. And when someone else walks in that has an advantage, one that I will never have, it's just disheartening. It's humiliating in a way. And I'm just waiting and hoping that more women will speak out and against this. Otherwise, we will slowly continue to be pushed out of our own sport in a category that was created to protect us.
That's right. You've just been mansplained in the most humiliating possible way. And I really hope someone in authority will start to stand up for you and people like you. Holly Lavasser, thank you so much for coming on tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We've got more news coming.